It started subtly, a prickling sensation that wormed its way beneath my skin. It wasn't unusual for the first tremors of sleep paralysis to begin that way. The familiar dread bloomed in my chest, hot and heavy. But this time, something felt different. The prickling wasn't confined to my body. It seemed to thrum in the very air. I forced my eyes open, greeted with the familiar sight of my ceiling, shrouded in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. But something was wrong. The shadows, usually benign, seemed to writhe and contort, forming monstrous shapes that danced at the periphery of my vision. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis didn't make the air buzz with a low, malevolent hum. I tried to scream, but my voice was a strangled gasp trapped in my chest. My limbs felt like lead, immovable and unresponsive. Terror coursed through me, a cold fist squeezing my breath. And then, I saw it. In the corner, a flicker of movement. My eyes darted towards it, desperate for something, anything to explain the oppressive feeling in the room. A figure stood there, shrouded in darkness. It wasn't human. It was too tall, too skeletal, its form a twisted amalgamation of bone and shadow. A whimper escaped my lips, a pathetic sound in the face of such primal fear. The figure tilted its head, and a sound like sandpaper on bone echoed through the room. It began to approach, its movement a slow, agonizing crawl. This wasn't a hallucination. The terror was too raw, too immediate. My mind wasn't conjuring this nightmare. This was something else. As the entity drew closer, I could make out details. Its limbs seemed to be composed of writhing black smoke, coalescing and dissipating in a constant dance of nightmarish form. Its head was an empty cavity, where eyes should have been, flickering with an eerie inner light. It stopped a few feet from my bed, the air around it crackling with a sickly green energy. It reached out, a clawed hand forming from the smoke, and I swear I could feel the icy tendrils of its touch brushing against the barrier of my paralysis. Then it spoke. The sound wasn't a voice, not quite. It was a vibration, a feeling in my very bones that sent shivers down my spine. Trapped, it rasped, the sound tearing through the silence. But not alone. A horrifying realization dawned on me. It wasn't here for me. It was feeding off the fear, the helplessness radiating from my paralyzed form. The hum in the air intensified, a chorus of terrified pleas I couldn't quite make out. Panic became a suffocating wave. I was trapped, a silent observer in a horrifying scene. I watched, helpless, as the entity reached towards the wall behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs as the smoke coalesced, forming a horrifying silhouette against the wallpaper. A woman, her face contorted in a silent scream. "Another soul," the entity rasped, a hint of satisfaction in its tone. The woman's form solidified further, her terror palpable, even through the haze of fear. "Another offering!" The scene unfolded in a horrifying slow motion. The woman thrashed, her silent screams echoing in the room. But her struggles were futile, the smoky tendrils of the entity wrapping around her, drawing a chilling shriek from her form. Then, with a sickening plop, the woman was pulled into the entity's empty head cavity. The room fell silent, the only sound my ragged gasps. The entity turned towards me, its empty eyes seeming to bore into my very soul. "Soon," it rasped, the words dripping with malice. My vision swam, a wave of black threatening to engulf me. But then, a jolt of adrenaline surged through my body. Memories of a sleep paralysis technique a friend had shared surfaced. Focus on a single point, wiggle a finger, anything to break free. Desperation fueled my focus. My gaze locked onto a mole on my wrist. With a Herculean effort, I concentrated on moving my thumb, a single, minuscule twitch. It felt impossible, but then there it was, a tremor, a flicker of movement. Emboldened, I focused on my entire hand, willing it to move. Inch by agonizing inch, my fingers twitched, then clenched. A guttural snarl erupted from the entity as the room started to pulse with a blinding white light. The hum died down, replaced by an ear-splitting screech. With a final desperate heave, I ripped myself free from the paralysis. I gasped, tears streaming down my face, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The room was silent, the oppressive feeling gone. But the terror lingered, a cold sweat clinging to my skin. I scrambled out of bed, adrenaline coursing through me. Flicking on every light in the room, I scanned the corners, the space behind the furniture, searching for any sign of the entity. Of course, there was nothing, just my room, the familiar surroundings that now seemed utterly alien. Sleep was an impossibility. I spent the rest of the night pacing, the terrifying image of the entity and the woman imprinted on my mind. Morning brought a sliver of sanity. Logic, albeit shaky, crept in. Maybe it was a hallucination, a particularly vivid nightmare fueled by the sleep paralysis. But the sheer terror and the residual feeling of unease gnawed at the edges of my calm. Days turned into weeks. I tried to live a normal life, but the experience cast a long shadow. I became hypervigilant, the shadows dancing with a new menace. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, fractured echoes of the entity and its chilling touch. One night, a sound jolted me awake, a scratching noise, soft but insistent, coming from the wall next to my bed. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to breathe, to listen. The sound stopped as abruptly as it began. Convinced it was just my overactive imagination, I tried to settle back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Hours crawled by, punctuated by every creak of the house settling. Then, I felt it again, a prickling sensation. This time, it wasn't just under my skin. It seemed to emanate from the room itself, a malevolent presence pressing against the walls. Desperately, I lunged for the bedside lamp, the harsh light momentarily dispelling the shadows. I scanned the room, searching frantically, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Nothing, just darkness. But then, as my eyes darted towards the corner, I saw it. A flicker of movement, a wisp of smoke coalescing from the darkness. Terror choked off my scream. It was back. This time, I wouldn't be trapped. Remembering the desperate struggle to regain control, I focused on my thumb, willing it to move. It was a battle, but slowly, agonizingly, my thumb twitched. The entity seemed to writhe as if in pain, the shadows swirling around it. This time, I was ready. With a roar of defiance, I ripped myself out of the paralysis. The entity recoiled from my sudden movement, its smoky form flickering wildly. It let out a screech, a sound that seemed to claw at my sanity. Then it did something unexpected. It spoke, its voice a cacophony of whispers. "You cannot escape us," it rasped. "Fear feeds us, and you are filled with delicious fear." The words sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't here for me. It fed on the fear it induced, but I knew what I had to do. Fear wouldn't save me. I took a deep, shuddering breath and faced the entity. It was terrifying, a nightmare given form, but I wouldn't let it win. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice hoarse but resolute. The entity pulsed with a menacing green light, but it hesitated. It hadn't expected resistance. I pressed on. "This is my mind, get out!" The conviction in my own voice surprised me. I raised my hand, pointing at the entity. "Leave and don't come back." There was a tense silence. Then the entity began to fade, the smoky tendrils dissipating into the darkness. It let out a final, chilling scream, before vanishing completely. The oppressive feeling lifted, leaving an echoing emptiness in its wake. Exhausted, but strangely exhilarated, I collapsed onto the bed. Sleep wouldn't come, but for now, I felt a fragile sense of victory. I had faced the terror and pushed it back. But the question lingered. Where did the entity come from, and would it return, drawn by the fear I knew still resided within me? I had learned that fear wouldn't save me, but what would? Perhaps the answer lay in understanding the entity, its purpose, its connection to the other terrified souls it fed on. Sleep may have eluded me, but sleep paralysis no longer held the same terror. It had become a gateway, a terrifying glimpse into a world beyond human comprehension. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.